I'm gonna get this out of the way at the onset. This video is not a deathmatch to determine which game is better. I'll tell you right now, I prefer It's About Time to Wrath of Cortex. It's not even close. That isn't really what this video is about. Rather, I wanted to compare the two as sequels to the original trilogy. What context were their developers afforded? What direction did they take? What inspirations did they latch onto? And how did that affect their legacy? Or in the case of It's About Time, how might that affect its legacy? While I do think the Crash 4 title for the new game was a good idea to tidy up the somewhat messy continuity, it doesn't change the fact that Wrath of Cortex ostensibly held the position in the discourse as an attempted sequel to the original trilogy. Whether or not you want to consider it Crash 4 is your own business. It was clearly trying to be Crash 4. Despite my preference for one over the other, I think there was a clear passion for the series in both instances, and just because one came out a little half-baked doesn't make all of their effort null and void. Just as Toys for Bob didn't nail everything out of the park with their attempt. This video will have more of a negative slant toward Wrath of Cortex, but I think it's a decent enough Crash game, and I have a lot of respect for Traveler's Tales. Now then, let's talk about Crash Bandicoot 4.
I'm ready to rock!
Crash Bandicoot, my old nemesis. How the heck are you? Still gathering crystals? Old habits die hard, don't they? My days are being spent on something much more intriguing. Meet Crunch, my newest creation.
Finding the core appeal of Crash Bandicoot is a bit of a tricky one. My own personal interest in the series is geared toward its satisfying 100% grind. I'd like to think most other fans have the same completionist kick, but it's hard to say. I wouldn't really call Crash an incredibly difficult platformer when you aren't going for all the gems or time trial relics. Janky as the first game might feel to control, its level design isn't ball-busting until you go after the gems, which in the OG PlayStation version required you to do every level without dying. It's likely the hardest game in the original trilogy to complete normally, though even then I wouldn't personally compare it to Dark Souls or something. Which, by the way, I don't think is necessarily wrong. A lot of people have never played a platformer or just don't count platformers in their realm of expertise. That's fine. Difficulty is subjective, and I'm not going to make fun of someone for saying they struggled with a video game hard enough that it was a comparable experience to Dark Souls. I don't blame people for thinking Crash is hard when the first game especially harkens back to the NES and SNES era so blatantly. Where games like Super Mario 64 were charting their own ambitious paths in a 3D space, I wouldn't say there's a better set of PS1 era 3D platformers that so faithfully recreate the tight, linear platforming you'd see in 2D Mario, Mega Man, and Donkey Kong Country. Crash 1, 2, and 3 are mostly no-nonsense platforming. Stylistically, the series takes a lot of inspiration from Looney Tunes and other similar cartoons. It was a stroke of pure genius to make the villains mad scientists. It lends a lot of manic energy to the principal villains and failed lab rat premise that only gets better as the series goes on. Ripperoo and Brio and Tropy, Dingodile, there's not a whole lot of them, but damn do their appearances make a great impression. I guess the appeal of Crash is a jaunt through the jungle, snow, ruins, factories, castles, machines, and all the different eras throughout our history. It's goofy, but it's a fun kind of goofy. When I think of Crash, I think of the Tiny Tiger theme from Crash 2. I think about that weird look Crash gives when he's about to ride a polar bear, and that odd victory dance he's so eager to perform. It's a delightfully silly, challenging platformer with a hook for perfectionists. I suppose the million-dollar question is, how do you follow that up?
The Crash Bandicoot, eh? Oh, I've heard so much about you, and this is the hero I have to blow away? Ha! Seems like a bunch of hot air to me.
It's the year 2000. We need another Crash Bandicoot game. Mark Cerny's all for it, pitches an ambitious free-roam puzzle platformer called Crash Bandicoot Worlds. Traveler's Tales is contacted for development, they make an awesome tech demo, and then Universal wrenches the series away from Sony exclusivity, claims the property as its own, Mark Cerny says goodbye, the project is forced to start from scratch, and now there are only 12 months to make Crash 4. What would you do? I would probably play it safe. Take the old formula, add new levels, don't fix what isn't broken. Huzzah! You survived game development! It's really no surprise Wrath of Cortex ended up the way it did, but I'll at least commend the team for trying their best to continue the series. One of their new ideas was to introduce 4 elemental masks. Figure they were probably onto something there. Aku Aku and Uka Uka are entertaining enough, so expanding the lore a bit and throwing more masks into the mix is interesting. It also fits that these masks are being used by Crunch, Cortex's successful attempt at a Bandicoot general for his army. Crunch gets to use masks just like Crash does. Symmetry. But at what cost? Despite all the Crash 3 villains getting a spot at the round table, for better or worse, all they really do is stand around as obstacles for you in stages. Every single boss fight is Crunch with a new mask, and I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a little lame. Let's look at the introduction of a boss like Entropy.
Now you're on my time, you little skunk! Give me the crystals!
You get a little insight into his personality before you fight him, he serves his role well, and then you move on to the next evildoer. I think that's always been a dope part of the Crash bosses. They always have entertaining intros to not only set the scene for the boss, but to leave a strong impression as a character.
Break out the butter! I'm gonna make toast!
Crunch doesn't really get that. His fights just sorta start. I think it's fun that the elemental masks get their digs in Crash 3 style. They have some fun one-liners.
Hope you brought your sunscreen, cause you're gonna burn!
I don't think they can carry an entire rogues gallery. The fun of Crash villains are that they come in all shapes and sizes, and represent the different shades of mania. Ripperoo has big swirly eyes, his arms are restrained by a straitjacket, and he can't even string together a coherent set of words, it's all laughs with him. Entropy is a condescending narcissistic genius. He is so in tune with his prized mastery over time itself that he's turned his own body into a clock, a terrifyingly devoted force to contend with. The elemental masks are a bit generic by comparison. Rocco is quick to anger, Wawa is aggressive, Pyro is level-headed but has a fierce side. They just kind of blend together, and nothing about their designs imply anything about their character other than to embody their elements. If you really want to stretch it, you could say that Rocco is stubborn as a rock, or that Pyro's anger is a slow burn. I don't know, it's just not the same. I had to look up these names on fucking Bandipedia. Crunch can be intimidating, but he can't carry an entire game. Feels kinda like making Tiny Tiger, the Komodo brothers' main villains. They just don't have enough presence. It's About Time also introduces new masks, but this time they're allies and game mechanics. Talk about bang for your buck. I wouldn't say they're absolutely genius designs or anything, but they are much more memorable. Ika Ika allows the player to shift gravity, and so it was designed to have a split personality. Optimistic and pessimistic. Kapunawa allows the player to control time, so she has hourglass earrings, and her headdress depicts the phases of the moon, implying she's been around a long time. Her age also endows her with an almost infinite wisdom. She's cute, probably my favorite new mask of them all. Like I said, they aren't brilliant characters, but they don't have to be. They just have to stand out amongst the crowd and make an impression in the player's mind. Not only do they do the 4 mask concept justice, they've also done justice to the antagonistic force headed up by Embryo, Engine, Entropy 1 and 2, and Cortex. I'd say they played it a bit safe with those picks, until I learned that Dingodile, Tana, and Cortex were playable characters. I'd say that's a sufficient enough shakeup. Plus, those old villains get just as much room to make their mark, adding just a touch more to what was already there. Entropy going out and finding a female version of himself from another dimension, which he then flirts with, is peak writing for a villain. It's genius. His ego is so inflated it could burst at any moment. I don't take these guys for granted anymore. Having fun villains taunt you throughout the levels is the glue that holds the wacky adventure together, maybe even more so than the actual story.
Great power has awoken. Crash, I fear it portends an event of reality-shattering proportions. I feel it emanating from Insanity Peak. Quickly, we must go! Crash! Crash! Crash!
Alright, so I'm about to complain a bit about Crash Bandicoot stories, so let me just preface that on my list of Crash priorities, having a good story is not all that high up there. However, I do think these two games stumble in interesting ways when framing a Crash narrative. The OG trilogy relied on memorable yet infrequent dialogue to act as a through line for the adventure. There's a basic premise like Cortex asking Crash for help, or Uka Uka awakening from his slumber, usually ending with Crash getting the one-up on old Neo. It's simple, yeah, but I don't think I'd have it any other way. Crash being such a soft-spoken protagonist who's not always mentally there means that it's a lot more fun to watch the villains endlessly taunt that simplicity, only for them to come face to face with the wrath of Sonic's ass. While that simplicity is cathartic, I'm not gonna say there isn't a fun continuity behind it. Crash 2 picks up exactly where Crash 1 left off, just as Crash 3 picks up where Crash 2 left off. It's an admittedly loose continuity, but one that Saturday morning cartoons also had. You can pick up an episode of Crash, know who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, pick up on the fact that they've had a history together, nonetheless enjoying that episode individually. It's a continuity that provides fans with a little treat for playing all the games, and lets new fans wonder about the other games. Wrath of Cortex doesn't take place directly after 3. There's a bit of context that's missing. All of a sudden, the Legion of Doom is in a space station, sitting around a table, workshopping ways to get rid of Crash Bandicoot. How did they escape being stuck in the Stone Age? I wouldn't be surprised if returning fans felt like they'd skipped over a game or something. Engine reminds Cortex that he's been working on a super special project to destroy Crash Bandicoot. It feels kinda clumsy. What baffles me about this is that the previous games weren't even thoroughly plotted. Cortex literally falls into a cave after Crash 1, finds a crystal, and hatches an entire world domination plan right then and there. It sets the tone for a sequel while providing a decent enough hook for new players, and it's barely even a few sentences. Wrath of Cortex ends in a good place. I like the reversal of Crunch betraying Cortex in the end and joining the good guys, especially since he's the most well-characterized of the new cast. It also helps that the story is about as hands-off as it's always been, giving brief tidbits before levels as the villains get more and more desperate. However, with the lack of any interesting characters outside of Crunch and Cortex, it's a pretty bland outing, easily the least memorable of the 4 games. Doesn't help that it frames its story in the exact same fashion as Warped, with the villains taunting the heroes before they enter the level, with 5 levels to choose from in a non-linear order. Seems a touch uninspired. As much as I love It's About Time, I wouldn't call its story bulletproof either, which is a shame because I really love parts of it. Traveling back to before the events of Crash 1 is really cool. I love how Cortex doesn't believe in his future self, I love how Crash caused the accident to happen in the first game, and I love that Cortex gets to relax on a beach in solitude. For a little while anyway. It takes place directly after the 3rd game. The characters are very well realized, especially Dingodile. I have no idea why they made him into a playable character, but it's exactly the kind of left field addition that I can't get enough of. Glad one of my favorite boys is sharing the spotlight this time. Unfortunately, there are things about the way the story is told that bother me. I really like Tawna. Her design is awesome, her backstory is pretty dark for Crash standards. She's a great addition to the cast, but having a moment where she tries to fight the entropies on her own is eye-roll worthy. This is a kid's game, still manages to drop a swear every now and then, but it is still a kid's game. A message like this isn't out of place in a kid's game, but it does feel out of place in a Crash Bandicoot game. I'm not trying to be an obstacle to change or evolution. I think it's fine to take the series' storytelling approach in a new direction. I absolutely love how the hijinks of Twinsanity was turned up to 11. It was essentially a comedy, and in that way, it took on a new meaning of the word cartoon. You just never knew what crazy thing was going to happen next. I loved it. It's also why I don't mind them pulling from that more pathetic, comedic rendition of Cortex. Clancy Brown's Cortex was a lot more sinister, but I've always preferred his portrayal in games like Twinsanity. You could even say that as the games have gone by, he's taken these attempts at world domination less and less seriously, becoming a lot more blasé about it all. Except this game also sorta implies that even before Crash 1 he was just as pathetic, which doesn't really reflect in the original trilogy as clearly, but oh well. I'm willing to take the weird semi-retcon in this instance because it makes for some of the most engaging dialogue in the series. Any scene with Cortex in it is amazing. I'm torn because I do think it was somewhat necessary to add more cutscenes, and I mostly like the approach they took, but then I watched this line from Coco and it just makes me shrink back into my seat for a few minutes.
But we're a team.
Oi! What'd I miss?
I love that there's an entire world where Crash and friends bum around and eat food. In any other series it would seem like filler, but it works in a Crash game. It's really only a minor thing. A few lines of dialogue are cringeworthy and it doesn't all fall into place perfectly, but I guess it at least succeeds in its pacing. Meeting a new mask at the end of every other world, getting a few exchanges in before they become mechanics, it has a nice rhythm to it. Do a few levels, more interactions, and then more levels. Rinse and repeat. It's a villain of the week, fly by the seat of your pants narrative style where you never really know what's about to happen until it happens. Maybe Cortex isn't the villain this time, until he is right at the very end. I'm not saying you could never try for something like a thematic through line or a message in a Crash Bandicoot game, but it's likely going to come off as forced as it was here. Not necessarily bad to have a more overt presentation. If they're gonna make more of these, I'd like more of a wild Twinsanity than a meaningful, heartfelt tale about friendship. Crash Bandicoot ain't really the vehicle you want to choose for that.
The final blow!
Hush, simpleton.
Engine, Embryo, you had some little projects you wanted to tell me about?
Master, my mechanical marvel will hypnotize you and I.
And my potion will make me and them unstoppable.
Right, yeah, fine, sure. Have fun with your ray guns or whatever.
Hasten your steps. By my calculations, our enemies are already moving against us, and we will prevail.
What's always rung true about Crash Bandicoot for me, the reason I've always loved it, is that it's one of very few series that can effortlessly summon forth my inner perfectionist. When I play the Crash trilogy, I am committed to an endurance test. Can I find and break every box? Can I locate the hidden paths for colored gems? Can I reach the deathless pathways? Can I get the ever-elusive platinum relic? From the outside looking in, it's absolute madness. It's just me throwing myself at a wall over and over and over again. Yet, there's something so enchanting about these tests of skill, a prospect that straddles the line between what is possible and what isn't. It's an initial task demanding enough to fill you with a sense of dread, while also supplying just enough hope to see you through to the end. This is part of the reason why I've always had an appreciation for Crash 1. It is uncompromising in this sense. Its levels are crafty, pinpoint precise, and often quite long. Sucks it had to control the way it does. Where Crash 2 and 3 added more gimmicks and made some of the moment-to-moment platforming more accessible, Crash 1 remains one of the most satisfying 100% experiences I've ever had, especially on the Insane trilogy, where there were time trial relics to seek out, and you didn't have to spend a significant amount of time wrangling with the controls. Crash 2 and 3 have their difficult moments, and I still really like them, but their popularity meant that a sequel was surely going to default to their likeness. Wrath of Cortex reminds me a lot of Warped. Some levels are really fun, some of them exist, and some of them make me want to rip my arms off. Wuthering Heights is pretty fun, there are some tricky enemy placements, it's a decently challenging box gem, and I really love the theme of being inside an airship. It's reminiscent of a classic Crash level, not doing much to innovate, but definitely doing a good job emulating. I would say most of the fun levels in Wrath of Cortex are more emulation than innovation. Gold Rush is a Western theme. Really dope song, love the dynamite and pack mules, and the platforming is pretty standard Crash fare. Avoiding explosives, jumping over pits, doing both at the same time. I'll even commend the medieval castle levels for being challenging, having interesting level obstacles to avoid that are very evocative of the time period, complete with a dragon chase sequence that still makes me smile. I think Wrath of Cortex handled the medieval theme 1,000 times better than Crash 3, which was basically just the Renaissance fair 5 times over. While these levels are fun, they do tend to blend together in my mind a bit. They have distinct theming that makes them stand out on the surface level, but very little about their level design feels like it's taking the Bandicoot in a fresh new direction. Crash and Burn is one of the only traditional platforming levels that's attempting something cool and unique. It's set during an active volcano, and the level's design winds around this volcano, getting more and more severe the further you make it to the top. I love this level. It has some difficult jumps, platforms that disappear under the lava, meaning you'll have to be using the death tornado spin, some sections with falling rocks to avoid. Even then, as unique as this theme is, the rest of the levels are the textbook definition of a fun, yet safe, Crash outing. All of the abilities you get are rehashes of the same abilities from Crash 3, the only new addition being this tiptoe move that lets you slowly crawl across nitro crates, marginally faster than the speed Crash can crawl across ceilings. This decent platforming, by the way, is when the levels are at their best. These fun levels are only half of the equation. The other half, a set of insufferably hit-or-miss ideas, harkening back to the worst of what Crash 3 had to offer on steroids. For every fun platforming adventure, there's a tedious swimming level, or a dogfight level, or a racing level, or a ball rolling level, and their quality ranges pretty low. I'll say right off the bat that the ball levels are actually pretty fun. I enjoy wrangling with the physics, trying to keep Crash on course, and hunting for all the boxes. It's a strange gimmick for sure, but I had my fun with it. They're usually fast-paced, difficult, and don't overstay their welcome. I could do without the excessive rumble though, so much as move the stick and your controller could be mistaken for a vibrator. No, where my issues lie are in the other gimmicks. Swimming is worse than it was in Crash 3, where it was already a bit slow and repetitive. Now you can barely see enemies before they run into you, there's more space to swim around in, which means more time faffing about for hidden boxes. They force you into this weird submarine device which can face toward the screen sometimes, the purpose of which is unknown to me since the ability to turn toward the camera only ever seems to make it harder to maneuver the damn thing. Dogfight levels are a little more involved than in 3, at the cost of there being more of them. All of them end in a matter of seconds and serve as nothing content. Same with the buggy stage, which is way too slippery. You're likely going to be playing this twice. Good luck getting the box gem while also getting first place, it's just not going to happen. These are distractions from the core Crash gameplay loop, a way to ensure the player doesn't notice how repetitive Crash platforming can really be when it doesn't push itself. In the second game, some levels were so easy that I noticed the cracks in its exterior a bit. This is why I imagine Warped had so many gameplay gimmicks, because Naughty Dog were legitimately running out of ideas as to how to push the series forward. Wrath of Cortex has 10 levels out of its total 30, which do not revolve around Crash platforming, and I even excluded a few levels that only had the gimmick for half the stage. You get around 20 traditional stages, and not all of them are fun or difficult. For instance, some levels have you using the mech suit. Oh, what a joy this thing is. Do you like a target reticle that only functions in the split second where you let go of the target button? Do you like only being able to jump while moving, lest you find yourself clumsily flying into nitro crates or bottomless pits? What an unfortunate mechanic to place front and center, presumably the thing you wanted players to care about the most, and all I ever hear is people complaining about how limited it is. Every time there's a wall clean segment, my heart sinks because of the abysmal speed decrease from Warped. Why did this even happen? What was the impetus? These are the continuous roadblocks to Wrath of Cortex's success. It barely has anything new to call its own. What it can call its own is hit or miss, in essence placing it a rung below even the third game it took the most inspiration from. You could strike it from the record and no one would notice, the mark of a truly unremarkable sequel. Crash 4, on the other hand, is so reminiscent of Crash 1, it's a little creepy. Its levels are much longer and have more of a difficult foundation. What would be 2 or even 3 levels in the OG trilogy are crammed into one. Bears repeating is half platforming and half polar bear. The first half focuses on the time stop mask. First, you're introduced to platforms which rise and fall like seesaws, which get progressively more difficult as they appear, until you have to use your time stop mask in conjunction with falling ice platforms. The 2 bonus pathways have their own unique time stop uses as well. One a cheeky reference to the high road, and the other revolving around nitro crates. This is the average length of a Crash Bandicoot level that would probably appear near the end set of levels. This one is at the halfway point, and there's still an entire polar bear section to do. It is the first polar bear section, so it isn't overwhelmingly difficult, but it's a fairly solid mid-level. As you'd imagine though, 100% requirements are affected by things like baseline challenge and length. To 100% this level, you have to break every box without dying, collect enough Wumpa fruit, and find the hidden gem. That without dying part is the linchpin here. You have to break every box in a flawless run. You're only allowed death in the bonus room. This is just a relatively simple mid-game level, so how about the endgame levels? I don't mean to be insulting, since I love Crash Bandicoot and the OG trilogy is fantastic, but Crash 4's final few worlds are exceptional in a way Crash has just never been. There's a sense of evolution to the level design here. You'll be using the masks to their fullest potential, sometimes one after the other. Food Run uses all of the masks in one level, and Cortex Castle uses them all back to back in a masterful final platforming section. These wall runs are used in fairly standard ways early on, but gradually become harder. They're used with phase shifting and even gravity shifting later on. These levels also need to be completed with 0 deaths for the perfect relic, a truly maddening prospect. I'm frankly surprised Toys for Bob were so willing to crank up the challenge this hard, when most people I've ever seen talk about Crash cite the first game as their least favorite for many of the same reasons. But for me, it's my own personal masochistic Crash heaven. They even went out of their way to fix things about the 100% Crash experience to eliminate a lot of the jank that was often associated with the task in past games. For instance, you can obtain the colored gems before encountering their colored gem pathways, which is something Wrath of Cortex was completely okay with maintaining. There don't necessarily have to be instances where you reach a level and literally can't complete it 100%. If you're skilled enough and perceptive enough, you can complete every level 100% on your first try. For repeat playthroughs, this means far, far less repeating of the same levels. Really, only one colored gem requires you to play the level twice, but considering the challenge for it is to not break any of the crates, and it's infinitely harder than the no crate challenge in Crash 2, I'll let that one slide. I do wish the yellow gem wasn't so obvious. It was the last one I found, and it was a bit of a letdown. The other 3 gems had hints drawn in the background, alluding to what you had to do. The yellow gem is just kinda hidden off screen above some boxes. A bit lame considering each level already has a hidden gem like that tucked away in some far off corner. I adore that each level and its inverted counterpart have a hidden gem to find. Not all of them are winners, but some of them are hidden about as devilishly as the boxes, and it really promotes a thorough exploration of the scenery. None of this difficulty feels artificially inflated either. I don't mind completing levels like Cold Hard Crash or Pissing It Away, but it's undeniable that they are insane difficulty spikes for Crash 2. Effectively the equivalent of asking the player to juggle blindfolded on a unicycle after having just learned how to juggle. Crash 4 has a more natural evolution. Earlier levels are shorter and more simple, so they aren't as bad to fully complete. Later levels are longer, hide more of the boxes, and are much harder to fully complete. Natural 100% curve rather than twisted nightmares followed by brain-dead hallways. It's like Crash 2 in the sense that it's straight Crash platforming for the majority, with a few polar bear segments thrown in and the occasional secondary character. Wrath of Cortex introduced levels where you could play as Coco in the actual platforming bits, and I always thought that was cool. Though a bit less exciting since Coco didn't have access to the abilities Crash did, it was still nice to have another character to control. That said, she really had 0 unique attributes to call her own, begging the question as to why she wasn't just playable to begin with. Crash 4 answers that the same way the Insane trilogy did. Crash and Coco play identically, and you can choose between them for every main level in the game. In addition, there are 3 new playable characters who each control fundamentally like Crash, but with unique abilities. Already, they're a much better compromise between breaking up the pace and keeping consistent with Crash's core platforming tenets. However, they're also mostly optional, meaning even if you'd rather stick to pure Crash platforming, you can. It's About Time is pure Crash platforming bliss at the peak of its effectiveness.
Can't you ever let me win? What do you want from me, you cretin?
Cortex! You realize that Crash may have collected all the crystals, but he doesn't have the gems. With the gems, we can resurrect the masks one last time and destroy that Bandicoot once and for all.
What then can we say about these 2 games as sequels? One is Safe was produced in a very short amount of time following some truly unfortunate upper management fallout, and what we ended up with was a fairly mediocre follow-up to the original trilogy. To their credit though, Traveler's Tales was probably on the right track with a lot of their ideas. They went for the same 4 mask setup as Toys for Bob, their levels each had unique music, the ball levels were a fun new addition to shake things up, and they even followed up with a neat inverse of Crash himself with Crunch. I think the best levels of Wrath of Cortex, Gold Rush, Bonsai Bonsai, Crash and Burn, all of them are evidence that there was a passion behind the project, a desire to make a worthy successor to the original trilogy that was just never meant to be. A mixture of decreased development time, new hardware, and a lack of new ideas that weren't poorly lifted from previous games. I think what I love most with It's About Time is that it doesn't talk down to these successors. Aside from like one joke at Wrath of Cortex's suspense, which even then is arguably a light jab more than anything, the game actually implies that Wrath of Cortex and Twinsanity could have existed in alternate dimensions. There are pictures of the elemental masks in the prehistoric dimensions, as well as pictures of the twins in the Bermugula dimension, where nitrous oxide shows up as a cameo. Nothing about Crash 4 is attempting to rewrite history. If anything, it took some ideas from Wrath of Cortex, making half the level platforming and the other half a gimmick, giving each level a unique music track, adding 4 masks that play a vital part in the story. If it had paraded its success in the face of those who came before, I think my opinion of it overall would be much lower. Let's put it this way, Wrath of Cortex failed to advance the series in any meaningful way. It was an interesting experiment that can yield a bit of fun every now and then, but it's not something I'd replay as readily as the originals. It's About Time brought so much to the table in terms of advancements. Clear difficulty evolution, more interesting level design, a game that strikes at the heart of what makes Crash great with a bit of its own flair. It's a sequel I can get behind, not one without its own slew of issues, but one that confidently takes the series in a new direction. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of the longer stage length, added difficulty, or the one-up to completion requirements. I completely understand and respect that, but I really don't see how you could make a new Crash game without upping the ante so furiously. We've already had 3 relatively similar games, so I'm glad the 4th game has donned its own identity, however contentious.